Hey, welcome to Module 3 of the IATA Dangerous Goods training. Today we are going to go over packing, marking, and labeling. So what you're going to need is just the presentation. I will show exhibits that I made up for this one afterwards. I'll send those to you in an email. Just so you have them on hand so you can see it. But so today it's a lot of the material we've already gone over in the 49 CFR IMDG, but this is specifically for IATA and air freight, so some of these change a bit. So we'll just kind of dive in. Good news, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter session, I believe. So let's start talking about our packing. So for IATA, we are sort of the same as we were before, but the nice thing about IATA, oh yeah, by the way, go ahead and get out your dangerous goods list. That was that exhibit for A, B, and C, because you're going to be able to see a few of the things that we went over in the last module about the whole table and understanding that, of actually putting them into practice and seeing where some of these things come in. So packing, you must comply with the packing instructions. And as we went over in the last module, the packing instructions in IATA give you really a clear guideline on what must be used when you're determining what kind of packaging material you're going to use. And we'll go into a little bit about what some of those are. You have to use packing materials as intended. So if you shouldn't be trying to put something liquid into something that was a solid outside packaging, and just kind of common sense of what it needs to be done. The external surfaces should be clean. Again, you can use reuse packaging, but you have to make sure everything is clean and there's nothing on it. So if you've got any kind of scuffs, that really doesn't affect anything, that's not that big of a deal. But if you've got any like tears on just the outside paper part that exposes some of the corrugation or something like that, if you've got the brown tape that kind of matches the packing material that you just want to cover it, it just gives a better appearance. But mainly you're concerned about the structural integrity. So if you've got corners that are crushed, things like that, you may want to just not use that, especially for hazardous goods. You could use it for non-hazardous goods. So I know a lot of the items that are packaged in the CCUSA facilities do have overpacks. And overpacks are really there for convenience. They're really good for air freight to keep your commodities together that are, say, on a pallet, because the airline does have the right to break your pallet if necessary, but they usually won't touch an overpack if it's the ones that y'all use, which are the fiberboard boxes on the outside. So this is just, like I said, more for convenience in handling to have an overpack. So if you've got cartons that you don't have to worry about resecuring them on the pallet and shrink wrapping, things like that. You may have some packages that aren't exactly the same size, so it might be good to put it in an overpack so you have a nice square rectangular box that, again, is better for loading a container. In an air freight container type thing. So for air freight, it's more my understanding when you're shipping out for air freight, usually it's things like return goods. I'm not sure how big of your operation is internationally for air freight for those goods. So you want to you probably won't be using overpacks as often on the air freight side, but if you do, we just need to go over these simple guidelines. You need to remove all the previous markings and labels that are on this overpack. So companies do reuse these. So you want to look at that to make sure, especially the labels are off. Markings, you just need to go around and be very clearly, you don't want to miss, you know, the wrong shipper or consignee name or something which or proper shipping name, something like that that's marked on the package. All the substances that go into an overpack need to be compatible. So here's where you would refer to your segregation in a container on which classes may not go together. You know, I would think that your batteries are going to be packaged separately if you're doing an overpack. Now you can take something like safety devices and articles that are 2.2 and 9 of like the struts and the airbags. Those are compatible. Those would be fine to go into the same overpack. So you just need to take a look at that, make sure that the warehouse people are trained in knowing of hard stops on what items really can't be put together in the same package. So, and then overpacks do have to have some markings on it. And it needs the proper shipping name and the UN number. So you kind of think that the proper shipping name on UN on anything dangerous goods always has to go just about on any kind of packaging. So it does have to go on the overpack so it can be easily identified in case there's an incident. The label overpack needs to be on there. So if you haven't seen that on what the overpack is, let me just slide down a little bit and show you that. Here you've got the overpack. It's just a red with the word overpack in a rectangular there. So those labels should be there. It can be pre-marked on the package if you've got packages that you have designed just to be used as an overpack. You can go ahead and have the overpack on it. You can have your orientation arrows already on it. So just something that takes away some of the decision making and some of the operational things that are going on when someone's actually packaging something. So the lettering has to be, you know, the 12 millimeters high, which is, I believe, the 1/2 inch. You know, as with your proper shipping name and your UN number. So you think about it, it just needs to be very readable on that. So overpacks over 1.8 cubic meters, which is about 64 cubic feet, require markings on opposite sides. So it's assumed that, you know, if you've got it a smaller package, the overpack only needs one set of markings on one side. If you've got ones that are pre-designed that are already going to be bigger than that, you might as well have them pre-printed on both sides to make sure, or clear instructions for those doing the packaging. So, and they have to be on opposite sides. They aren't on sides that are touching. So, and then some of that is if you're not pre-labeling things or marking things, you want to be make sure your operations people who are doing this understand what is 64 cubic feet, and that's about 2 cubic meters, as I said, 1.8. I teach our people that think of a cubic meter is about the size of a desk that you work at, a standard work size desk. Might be a little bit harder for people to picture because we have so many cubicles, but if you think about a desk, it's about that size. So, you know, 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, it's not that much. It just kind of works out to that. So, mixed packages that are in the same. So if you did put the articles pressurized and the safety devices in the same overpack, you need to be marked for each of them. So you have to show both proper shipping names, both UN numbers on that overpack. So just making sure that they know everything that's in that pack that's in there. So you'd have 2 sets if you had that, or you could have 3 possibly. So packing groups, it's always one of those things you want to relate packing to packing groups of making sure that things kind of fit in on what you're deciding, and make it so it's more of a common sense type of thing. Because you do have class 9s, those are a little bit harder. You really need to go to the packing instructions to tell you what kind. We talked about the safety devices yesterday. even though it doesn't have a packing group, there are still packing requirements when we read that it has to be at least a packing group 3 standard. So you have to have packaging material that has gone over the testing criteria and is been designed and manufactured to handle dangerous goods. So other ones, like I said, some companies make the decision that if they don't have any packing group 1s in their facility, they make all of their dangerous goods packing at least a packing group 2. So you can use the Y, which we'll talk about in a second, on the spec code, or packing group 2. You can use those for packing group 2 or packing group 3. So just something you need to decide on whether you want packaging materials specifically for each packing group, 1, 2, or 3, or if you want to go, if you don't have any packing group 1s in your facility, then you just go straight down the line and pick packing group 2. That's what a lot of companies do. Packing instructions, we went over there. We went over that yesterday for the safety devices. On that handout of kind of running through that. It says reviewed in Module 3. I meant Module 2 there. Sorry about that. It is found in Section 4. So a reminder is if you're looking at your dangerous goods list and you go over to column G, it says packing instructions for limited quantities. You're not dealing with that. Then you're looking at packing instructions in I. And so it gives you a number there of where you go in that section. And that's the yellow pages of the IATA regulations. It's in section number 4. Actually, it's 4.1.4 is where you want to look. So that's where you're finding a lot of information in those yellow pages, which coincidentally, that's where we used to find phone numbers and companies in the information. So I've talked about this UN specification code, and you may know what this is and be familiar with that. So what I've done is I've got an example of a solid and a liquid UN specification codes. So when you see that UN number in that circle, you're saying, oh, okay, I've seen that before on some of my packages. So for packaging that has been certified and passed the testing criteria to handle or hazardous goods to be shipped in it, when you buy these, the manufacturer puts this code on it. And it looks like it's a kind of complicated code, but I'll kind of break it down that it really is pretty simple because we're only really looking at the first half of it to make any kind of sense. So let's look at the solid fiberboard box up on the top. You've got the UN in the circle there. It can be red or black, whatever color you want, as long as it's contrasting and you can read it. But you see it's followed by a set of numbers and letters. And if you think back to the 49 CFR training that we had, these are the packaging types that we showed you. And the 4 refers to boxes. 1 is a drum, which you'll see on the liquid below that. But the 4 here is meaning that it's a box of some kind. And then the G is it's made out of fiberboard, which is cardboard. So this is a 4G. So that's good. I've got a fiberboard cardboard box here. It should start with a 4G. Makes sense. Next, you've got like a slash, and then you've got a letter and a number. The letter is what packing group can be packaged in this. So if it starts with an X, it can be packing group 1, 2, or 3 can go in that. If it was a Y, it could be packing group 2 or 3. And if it's a Z, it can only be packing group 3. So most people see this as a Y in there, that it is packing group 2. And again, that's something that if they're looking at certain commodities, somewhere in the system, whoever's selecting the packaging material, when they go to stuff it in there, or place them in there, I use the stuff or a lot, they want to make sure that matches up. So if they've got a packing group 2 material, then it needs to show that it's at least a Y and it's not a Z in there. So, and then the number that follows it is the gross mass, and that would be 3. So this fiberboard box can hold up to 3 kilograms of cargo inside of it. So you don't want to overstuff it and have it way too much. And then the next letter is whether it's a solid. If it gets an S, so, you know, this is solid. It's a solid. It's going in a box. I hope it's a solid. And then you get into the year of manufacture. So this would be 2019. The country of manufacturing is USA, and then a certification or manufacturing code is here on who actually made the product. So if you think about it, you're really not looking at this part of it, the last 3 right there. Hopefully you've got compliant packaging in there. So that's that just is an identifier to find out who made it. It's really the first 3 things that you're looking at to make sure you select the correct packaging. Down on the bottom, we're looking at drums, or we're looking at liquids, what liquids can go into. And your packaging code here is an A1A. So it is a steel drum there, whether it's closed head, open head, I forget which one's 1 and which one's 2, but that indicates that you're using the right packaging material for what you've chosen. The X means it can hold up to a packing group 1, which a lot of drums do because they're totally sealed with something, so you do get a lot of the X's on those. You don't see 2s as much. 1.5, that specific gravity. Now, of course, the guys out on the floor that are loading some of these probably don't know how to calculate the gravity of a material. I'm sure that's already in your system, or you've got in your system the pre-approved type packaging they can use for this. For liquids, of course, it gets very specific. And then the 250 is how much hydrostatic test pressure, the KPAs that this can handle. And so, like I said, this is all done, of course, on the packaging group of selecting what kind of materials are in your facility. These are not things that are calculated by people out on the floor. So, and then you've got your, again, the year, the country, and the manufacturer's code or symbol at the end. So this is just to give people an idea. The main thing that you really want to teach people if they're loading dangerous goods, they just want to make sure that it has this UN mark. That's and more than likely, if it's got the UN mark, you know, your packaging team should have the right type of materials in there, but they just have to make sure they know of whoever's spot checking of these loadings or supervising the loading of the packages needs to make sure that if they're loading dangerous goods, it's got this UN code on the outside of the package. So, okay, and just so you know, I've kind of referred to it before, but usually you're buying things with a UN code on it. So if you're doing that, you're making sure. If you're building your own overpacks, you need to make sure that you're using that you're testing this material and the packaging that you're using, that it will pass a drop test, and there's certain specifications on the drop test on what packing group you're in. So you have to do it from a certain height for each packing group to see if it passed the test. You have to drop it on all sides, all corners, to make sure that the integrity of the packaging holds up in those tests. For liquids, you've got a leak-proof test, of course. If you want liquid, you don't want to pour liquid into a cardboard box without holding it in. You've got stacking test. There's also shaking test, things like that. The shaking test is kind of interesting because it does come into play with, if you remember, we talked about in Module 2, they said, okay, when you package these safety devices, you just need to make sure they don't come in contact with other ones so that somehow it could set it off or activate it in some way. So you want to do some kind of shaking test that when you've got it packaged in there and you think it's secured, you know, you want to make sure that, yeah, it maybe say bubble wrap is enough around each one. But if you do a shaking test and you open it up and you see a good percentage of the bubbles have popped, then that's not a good enough bubble wrap to use, or bubble wrap just may not work out for that, just because maybe it's got little tiny pointy corners that's going to pop something like that. And then, of course, your stacking is, you want to make sure that if you're you've got to be real clear of whether or not something can be stacked or not stacked when you're given instructions, because you don't want something to collapse. But you don't see as much of that in the air freight industry. But your dangerous goods, especially, you want to make their good solid packaging, because you just kind of want to assume that something could be or will be stacked on top of it. So let's talk about marking and labeling. And again, some of this is a little bit of a review, but relevant marks are in the correct location. So you need to make sure of the size of the package. If it requires more than one marking on different sides, you want to make sure they're the right height, again, at least a ½ inch high. And they're in a place where they're readable. The whole idea is for visible, easy access in case there's an incident, and to be able to see what is in that package. So you definitely want to take that into consideration. Remove or obliterate any irrelevant marks. So, that's up to you. If you have the, the first thing, if you're reusing packaging that has marks on it, already has marks, of whether you're going to use a very thick Sharpie that totally wipes out what it is, or if you're covering it with, say, a brown tape over it, that tape is going to stick and not come off. Just kind of common sense there. You want only the information on the outside that pertains to that specific shipment. Each package is marked. You want to, you've got to mark all of them. When something is hazardous, it needs to have at least that UN number and proper shipping name on inner and outer packaging, with some things. The marks must be durable, and they must be able to withstand weather exposure. So remember, these goods can be sitting in a warehouse for a long time. They can be out in the rain or snow, so they can have that type of exposure to the weather when they're loading aircraft. So you want to make sure that they're in best possible way, that they're durable. So that's why most people don't like to mark by hand on things, because a lot of that will fade or bleed or whatever on it. You want actual printed labels that you want to attach to the cargo's exterior. They need to be readily visible and legible. So if you got a bad handwriting, you don't want someone that is doing that. Your goods are pretty much okay, but some of these chemical company names, you can imagine the misspelling, things like that on some of those names. So visible, legible. I believe y'all print most of your labels and markings that go on of these things. So the requirements that need to be on each package that you do is the proper shipping name, of course, the UN number. And when I say proper shipping name, if you had a technical name, that would need to go on it also. The UN number with the UN in front of it is important. The full name and address of the shipper and the full name and address of the consignee. Like I talked about with air freight, sometimes they break down pallets and cartons and they get separated and then put back together. So you want to make sure you're very clear on what goods go together, that they can match the shipper and consignee name, so they go back together. If something gets separated from the shipment or left behind, a lot of things get lost in transport temporarily for most of them. If they've got good marks on it, someone will come across that and say, oh, this is that piece that was missing. I see Mercedes' name on it. Yep, and I remember it was going to India, so probably this is it. Let me move this up to the front office and check to see if this is something that they're looking for, or you've got a, a bulletin out there from the airlines. In the old days, we used to actually go to the airlines to look for lost cargo on behalf of the airline because we knew what it looked like, because we do pre-inspections in our facility before they go out. And, we would a lot easier be able to find some goods. But you can imagine they have some pretty big areas that are lost and found, and to be able to find out what a shipment goes with. You've got your net quantity on the outside of this package, of each package. You need to be able to show what's in there as far as a quantity. So you need to be showing that somewhere in your system, so whoever's doing the packaging can take the total count and figure out what the total is. Now, whether that's something you input in your system and it prints off as part of this label with the shipper's name, the consignee's name and address, the proper shipping name, the UN number, the net quantity, that's what a lot of companies do when we're putting up the order here. I've got to put 12 of these units. It's going from here to there, and they print a label and all the information comes out, and that's adhered to on the package. If it is salvage, if you're doing any of these returns or sending things out as salvage, it needs to be marked that it's salvage goods, just so that during the transport, if there is, someone looks at it and sees that something looks like it's broken or whatever, and it's marked salvage, they know that it's something that's happened before and it's in okay shipment, okay condition to ship. The size, again, it needs to be a certain size unless it's under 30 liters, and then it can be a much smaller size. But it needs to be in relation to what the packing material is. That's the main thing. If you can't get to that 4-inch size on the labels or on the markings, you can't get to that 1/2 inch, and it's a smaller box to be able to fit everything on, it's okay to do that. And it does get a little bit tricky to do all that on air freight shipments, because sometimes you're just shipping one piece and it's hard to get the actual markings on there. So that's why you might have to do an overpack of that one piece just so you can fit the marks and label on the box it's shipping. You don't want to overpack anything. As far when I say use over packaging, I did see at CCUSA earlier this year is they had overpack for batteries, and whatever the type battery was, it fit 6 batteries in together. Well, for some reason on their ordering, they usually order in quantities of 12 or 24, I'm not sure, to where they're shipping. And so all their packaging material comes in pre-designated sizes for 12 or for 24, for 12, or for 6. So I've got a 24 order shipment. I can take 4 of the boxes that have 6 in each. I can take 2 of the 12 or 1 of the 24. How it was designed, very good idea. But every now and then you're off by that number, that you may not have it in supply, but they want all that's there, and you only have 1 left, but your orders are to ship everything, which it was on this particular case. So an order for 24 turns out that they only had 19 in stock. So they loaded the they loaded the 3 of them at 6 each, and then they loaded 1 with just 1 of them in it. So they had this large box that they only had 1 battery in. So they didn't have that option to go any lower than 6, but they need that option because they took up a lot of space. And when you're talking about air freight, that's the last thing you want to do, because your air freight rates are dependent on the weight and the size of the package. So you want the smallest possible package in the lightest weight, because that's what you're going to be charged. So for this 1 battery, the air freight charges were like 6 times higher than what they should have been. And when you're talking about air freight, ocean, it might not be as big of a difference on the space it takes in a container, because those are very limited. But a box that size, instead of shipping it for $200 by air freight, it could have cost $1,200 to ship by air freight. A big difference. And I think the people that actually do the packaging they don't see that at the end. You know, they don't see or have to be accountable to what the final shipping costs are. So when you're talking about air freight for the packaging group and you out in the line of who's actually doing the packaging, you want to make sure they have options for every quantity. Like if you have, it may be standard of like, yeah, all we do is ship 6, 12, and 24. But there could be cases where you might have to ship 1 through 5. So if it's an order for 1, they need instructions on how do they ship 1. If they are shipping 3, they need instructions on how to ship 3. So, you know, it might be a solution of saying, okay, we might have to suck up some of it, but we need to come out with a design for 3 of these units so that we aren't at least going 6 times higher on the ocean freight. Maybe we're only going 3 times higher than what we have to pay. Up to you, but understand these were things the people on the floor at that warehouse were making decisions on, and they were bad decisions because one, they loaded one on one end, so the weight doesn't match to what the size, so that's kind of could be a red flag somewhere down the line. If someone goes to move this or pick this up and it's all tipping on one side of all the weight, you know, and say you're looking on the outside and it's like batteries, maybe the first thought someone might think is, oh my God, I wonder if when all the battery acid leaked out of these things and that's why it's heavier on one side or something like that. So just want to be careful with that of using the correct type of material that you should be using. And that goes back up to our original, you know, the packaging, you know, should be used as intended. And, you know, the intent is not to have large packages when you don't need it. So talking about labels, I had it as Exhibit 3A, which is kind of a convoluted of these. They weren't real clear or real big, so I brought out for air freight what are the labels that we're actually using or looking at. So let's look here. I've got on your top row, these are the labels for the dangerous goods that y'all normally ship. You're looking at non-flammable compressed gas. That's that nice green label. I'm sure you've seen it. And the whole idea behind a label is to give immediate understanding of what you're dealing with. So non-flammable gas, if somebody sees that, now whether they see that as a cylinder on the top and then they see the words non-flammable gas and understand that, they know they see the 2 there, so it's a gas and it's a green, you know, it's that 2.2 label there. Just an identity mark to help make it a little bit clearer. You do those for the articles pressurized hydraulic, so your struts and your shock absorbers. Next, we've got flammable liquid. The flammable liquids that fall into those categories are the paint and gasoline. I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot or exporting a lot of those. You may be bringing it in, but you need to be familiar that you're going to see this label in your facility of flammable liquid. So there's a lot of very common sense that go along with flammable liquid. You know, the old days was, you know, there's a flammable liquid sign, so this is not a good place to smoke. Nowadays, people don't smoke indoors on some things, but it is, you know, I need to make sure that I'm working on this, and there could be some sparks going off here. I shouldn't be doing it next to that package that has a label on it that says flammable liquids. Good common sense. Big red label means flames. You got a big flame on it, says flammable liquid. Class 3 should be identifiable. Corrosive, here we're talking about the batteries. And those are, you know, when it comes in contact with a material or with human or skin, it can basically corrode or have a corrosive effect. It's a black and white one. It's got that goofy little picture of the test tubes pouring it out on a hand and some material and it eating away at it. It says corrosive, class 8. So again, another thing that you should be able to identify. And then you got your 9s, which is your airbags and your seatbelt pretensioners. Class 9, okay, this is dangerous goods, but they're not that dangerous. But just to be familiar with those, you do see a lot of these pre-printed on packaging because it's black and white, and it's a feasible thing to do. So those are all common ones that you should see in your facility. On the next line, we're talking about the lithium-ion battery label, which y'all should should be familiar with this. You can see the old one on the left that was obsolete last year, so it's been almost 2 years. The new mandatory one, and as you see, the big difference is the battery sign is a lot bigger. Of the picture, we like pictures. The UN number there you have to specify because there are so many types of lithium-ion batteries, and exactly how to respond to them are a little bit different. So the UN number is extremely important on the labels here. I got a new laptop in the other day, and on the outside of my package, it had the lithium-ion battery on there. So came into those, show you, sorry, it comes up, but yeah, it was right there pre-printed on the package with the little red outline. You don't have to worry about the right one. So that's the battery people that are going to have to decide whether or not that they go with specific packaging for each one. They also have a label that says UN, and then there's a black line, and you can write in what it is. I would think if y'all are going to be producing these and shipping these out, you'd want pre-printed labels. If you're just doing returns on certain things, then you probably can get the ones where you write in if it's not going to be an everyday occurrence. So keep an eye. And the other thing, just a suggestion, in your areas where you have these labels, where you're doing these, making sure that they're being applied to the actual packagings, and the batteries, you need to do an inventory here and clean house. I would suggest somebody doing it before the audit next week, getting rid of any old or obsolete labels. So I would take your dangerous goods book, whichever one with you, and go to the label section and just look through that you don't have some that are old that is not being used anymore or obsolete, and you've got the latest ones there. So if you've got these still sitting around, get rid of them. They can't be used anymore. So, and to make sure every place that it's been done gets rid of some of these things. Like I said, I had our shipping department, they had their supplies in one drawer, and then they had supplies they never use anymore in another drawer. And my question was, if you're never going to use them, why don't you get rid of them? And they're like, well, you never know. They're still okay, but they're not okay. So if the regulations say you can't use them anymore, get rid of them. So then we've got some that apply more to air freight, or you got to be really careful with air freight. The first one is y'all don't have, well, your lithium-ion batteries are one of them. So some of those, as you remember, it said on there that it can only go on cargo aircraft. And like I said, I'm a little bit blind here because I'm not sure how the battery people are going to be shipping things out, or if they even are by air freight. But cargo aircraft only. When it cannot go on a passenger, you put this label on it. And it's a funny looking little label it just reminds me of like for those of y'all old enough, a Bazooka Joe cartoon type of thing. It's got the handler out there saying, no, it can't go on this airplane because there's people on here. So story behind this was a label around for a long time. When they redesigned some of the labels, 10 years or so ago, they got rid of this one and made a more modern one. They did not like it. The line handlers or whatever, people liked this label. They knew this label. They really wanted it to stand out there that under no circumstances should this stuff ever get on an aircraft with passengers. It's got that orange color to it. That's like this weird orange color. Y'all appreciate this. It's almost like that. It's a little bit mutier, but it's a little bit like that ugly Tennessee orange color. Not that I'm up for any orange color. I'm not a Tennessee fan. I'm not a Auburn fan, and I am certainly not a Clemson fan. I'm a South Carolina Gamecock, sad to say, but you know, that's a whole other level of suffering that I do. So just very important on the battery, people are really going to have to look out for this if you are shipping things for air. Another thing on the batteries that we'll talk about is just making sure you understand what Daimler's regulations are or requirements or restrictions are for shipping lithium-ion batteries. I know they do have some. Then we've got the overpack, like I showed you before. There's the overpack. We've got orientation arrows. Orientation arrows are just a smart idea on any kind of packaging. So it gives people pretty clear of what end they need to open. You know, especially if you've got these things like that are in that foam package inside where you're sticking the struts or the airbags into, you know, position so that they don't move. If they open it from the bottom and then they're kind of defeating the whole purpose of keeping them separated and they take it off from the bottom and the other thing, it could be a mess. So just knowing what the right way to open. If y'all do have any limited quantities, like I said, we didn't see any out there yet. The difference on when you do markings for limited quantity for air freight, it's got to have that Y in the middle. So, and there is a reason for that. I forget what it is, but there is something behind the Y. So that is what your labels look like that you see. A couple of other things on here. I thought there was something else that I wanted to go over on this one. But that's about it for this one. We will jump back into the dangerous goods declaration on the next module. That's more of an interacting where we're going to go field by field. We did a lot of those on the ocean and domestic side already, so you're familiar. But for air freight, they do have a specific format you must use. Remember, one of the things on IMDG, they said any format is fine as long as it has all the information. They mostly look the same, but some of them are a little bit different. Not for IATA. You've got to have those red stripes down. The things have to be in specific ways. So we want to go over that one a little bit more carefully of doing that. So that's going to be on the next module. This should be should do it for this module. So hopefully we will have that out today. Again, I do apologize. This one's getting out a little bit late because we had some technical difficulties internally with some of the systems. So, but things should be proceeding now and everything going forward. So that's the end of this. I'll see you in Module 4.